labyrinth backstage at the San Francisco Opera House hides more than just sets and costumes, including secrets and hatred, in Erica Miner's Overture to Murder from her Julia Kogan Opera Mystery series. Welcome to Blackbird Writers Presents Author Interviews. I'm Sharon Lynn, and welcome to you, Erica.
Thank you, Sharon. It's always such a pleasure. I so have been looking forward to this and getting into the nitty-gritty of what goes on back there.
Me too. I just love me a good backstage at a theater. Um, because they really are crazy.
Indeed.
So let's just jump in to Overture for Murder. The prologue is set in 1922. Did that have any special meaning for you that year, or was it just timing wise to work with the story?
It's mostly to work with the story. It's very significant to the story and the history of San Francisco opera and how it all came about. 1922 was the actual first performance of San Francisco opera, though it didn't take place, there was no opera house yet. But it was conducted by the founder, Gaetano Merola, an Italian, obviously, at the Stanford University Stadium. So that is a real event. So starting the prologue during that performance at that time in the company's history was my way of hinting at later revelations about a very important character in the present time version of the story and foreshadowing how that character is affected by that history. Merola literally worked himself to death establishing and keeping this company going in a city that, in his time, was considered to be a hellhole of savagery, especially when he first arrived there, really had a long way to go to become a major city. So as we peel off the layers of the story and its characters, the reader finds out how this initial 1922 event slowly and inexorably leads to the climax.
Absolutely. And yeah, your history throughout is just so wonderful. And there's so many times where I was like, wait, is that true? And had to like go look it up and then and then come back to it, which was also true when I was reading the Santa Fe one as well. So that's just a really fun little perk of your books is that little bit of history. Um, so I know we've talked about this before, but for our fans who are new, can you tell us the difference between a maestro and a concert master? Because Julia is the concert master.
Oh, absolutely. The word maestro in Italian means master. In an orchestra, the maestro is generally a conductor, but the term has evolved over the centuries to mean anyone who is a master at some artistic endeavor. So the concert master is the first of the first violinists in an orchestra. People will be familiar with this. If you've been to a concert or an opera, you'll see that the concert master, yes, if you want to stop.
No,
Oh, I
just the tap, tap, tap. Yeah.
So the he taps his bow on the stand sometimes, sometimes not. But everybody knows when he gets up before the performance, it's time to tune, and she, I should say, gives the indication to the first oboist for the note that everybody's supposed to tune to. But that's not all. He's not just the leader of the first violinist, but really the leader of the entire orchestra and has immense responsibility as that leader. The rest of the musicians look to the concertmaster for that leadership, especially though in an opera, because in an opera, the conductor is very preoccupied with what's going on the stage as well as in the pit. And if something, if there's some kind of a train wreck that might just happen or a singer gets lost or something, the conductor has to be completely preoccupied with that. So it's up to the concertmaster to make sure that the rest of the players can look to the concertmaster to know, where sometimes, in fact, for the concertmaster to conduct even. I remember one time we were doing a very difficult opera with a very elderly but famous conductor who at that point was maybe 81 years old and not as sharp as he had been previously. So he actually literally got lost in this passage of the score. And yeah, it was pretty scary stuff. But he, he
I'm just having a little panic attack right here.
imagine how we felt, you know. And but that's what the concertmaster does. So our concertmaster at the Met, Raymond Yevik, who I call the Rolls Royce of all concertmasters, he could not have been more brilliant at it. He literally got up and started conducting with his bow, you know, until the conductor got his act together. So Ray
Wow.
saved the day, we say, and he was doing that all the time. If ever there was any doubt of anything, you look to the concertmaster for that leadership, and a really great concertmaster is there for you 100% of the time, as Ray was. So yeah, a lot of things going on with the concertmaster, which makes it really difficult for Julia because she's young and she's talented, but it's a very high pressure situation. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And in your books, because they take place in various places, she's usually a guest. So
indeed.
yeah, yeah, not everybody doesn't just like automatically trust her. Um,
So,
and yeah, there's a character in this book who's very mean to her. Um, it's like that was completely uncalled for. Um,
and that also was part of my experience at the Met, not being concertmaster, but being the target of some pretty mean people. As you know, egos can run very high, not just on stage, but in the pit.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, a follow-up to that, there's a very important character who is the stage director. And that's different than a stage manager. So, could you tell us what a stage director is for an opera and then what kind of power they have?
The stage director in an opera is very similar to that in a theater, except that the stage director is dealing with people singing opera, which is, in my estimation, many cuts above Broadway musicals. That's a different subject. But a stage director generally has complete control, supremacy over all of the singers on stage, and directs everything they do, where they stand, where they walk, where they sing, how they act, with whom they act, how they move, where they move, and more. So it amounts to complete control. Now, I'm not sure why, but these days in opera, the stage director wields more power than ever before. It's been this trend lately. And so everyone else that's involved with the stage, including stage managers, even sometimes the general director, will completely kowtow to the stage director. So in the last 10 or so years, I've seen that stage directors have more power than anyone else. This balance of power has shifted quite a bit. So, of course, in Overture to Murder, that particular director goes way over the top, but you have to read the book to find out how that goes down.
Way over the top. Um, yeah, and that was a term actually that being a theater person I hadn't heard before. There's a stage manager just calls the show. So a stage director is a lot closer to the director who often have more power than they probably need.
Well,
Um,
the fact that often, especially in the last few years, the director can dictate, you know, even what the set designer does. And, I mean, it's gotten, yeah, so that they're really powerful. So there can be a lot of rivalry there for those reasons, which makes it very
and and you do a great job explaining those rivalries. So Julia has a daughter in this book, and she is trying to teach um, her how to play the violin as Julia plays. And I'm just wondering, have you ever tried to teach somebody who is as stubborn as Rebecca?
well. I'll tell you my experience with 5-year-olds in general, starting with my own daughter at that age, who was very stubborn. I based a lot of Rebecca's character on her. 5-year-olds tend to behave in certain ways. They tend to be very strong-minded. When it came to my own violin students, I found that most of the very young ones were stubborn and rebellious, like Rebecca, for good reasons. They just didn't want to practice. And frankly, Neither did I when I was that age. You know, you can hardly blame them. But I mostly based the scene of Julia teaching her own kid the violin on my experiences with my own father having taught me. I was older than Rebecca when I started, but I reacted very similarly. Age 5, you you begin to know who you are and be aware of yourself as a person. At least I remembered that as being kind of a benchmark for me. You think you know a lot, but of course you know nothing. And so that doesn't mean you can't stubbornly speak your mind and insist you know how to do things, especially when you're dealing with a parent, especially a father who I adored and vice versa. Now, my dad wasn't a professional violinist, though he could have been, but there were some complicated circumstances. But he started out by teaching me everything he knew, which I absorbed very quickly. And then he sent me to an outside teacher for more advanced studies. But even when I was studying with someone else, technically, he insisted on practicing with me every day. And I wanted to practice on my own. So there were a lot of tearful sessions, like the one, between Julia and Rebecca, which I also based on my experience. So in the end, I was a little bit older. I stood my ground. I threatened my father. I said, if you don't let me practice on my own, I'm going to quit the violin. Um, yeah. So then he backed down. So that showed me that rebellion works.
Sometimes, I mean, sometimes it's just like, oh, yeah, well, maybe I won't practice. But in
Yeah.
your case, it worked very well since you were a professional violinist for quite some time.
He guilted me into being, the best I could be. That's what it came down to. So
Well, it's such a beautiful, perfect scene. As a mom, I'm like, oh yeah. Uh, And even though it's been many years since my daughter was 5, it was still just brought all of that back. And so, and that bond is just really important throughout the book. There are just these moments where Julia is worried about Rebecca, and you so feel it. Just really nicely done. Um, so there are chapters. Oh, all of the chapters actually start with some quote from Wagner, from the Ring Cycle, which I'm not going to try to say in its native
neither
language.
am I.
Okay. I always just wind up going, um,
German is not my strongest language. So
so did these little like bits and phrases, were they all just things that you had experience with and you just kind of remembered and found them and popped them in, or did you have to go looking for, okay, I need something that says something about treachery, for example?
a little bit of both, actually. I played Wagner's Ring at the Met more times than I can count. In fact, I once calculated I played more hours of Wagner overall in my 21 years than any other composer. And also, our conductor slash music director, James Levine, especially loved the Ring. He loved Wagner, especially the Ring. So we played it endlessly. We recorded it. I knew it very well. So I chose the Ring as the overall core of the mystery in Overture to Murder, not only because of my familiarity and the fact that it's considered the greatest opera cycle ever written, but also because there's at least one murder, if not more, in each of the 4 operas. I thought, what a great idea. I did, as you said, try to pick out quotes that were relevant to what was happening in the story,
Mhm.
especially when it came to that treachery. And the Ring is just treachery from beginning to end. Uh, so I did it partly with that, and partly because I wanted the feeling of the sound of the language, because as you know, I do the quotes in both the original language and the English translation. And sometimes the language itself, especially German, is so evocative of that kind of, treachery between people, in this case, gods mostly. And so I thought, I tried to choose it for that reason as well. So it's partly because of the plot, but also because of the sound of it, the effect that it makes on the reader.
Yeah, that the German has just kind of a there are so many explosives in German. It just kind of comes across as violent. And so
It's the perfect word, explosive. That's exactly it.
yeah. Um so why not? So it was Julia and Larry been together. 3 books now. Larry is our detective, retired detective. And they have a child together. So why aren't they married yet?
Well, here's the thing about Julia. She's quite the intriguing character, and she has a lot of very idiosyncratic traits. So, in the first 2 books of the series, Aria for Murder and Prelude to Murder, the reader discovered how Julia's childhood traumas affect her as an adult. And one of those wounds has to do with the tragic loss at an early age of someone very, very close and important to her. And so this makes her feel insecure about allowing herself to be too close to someone because she's afraid that she'll lose them too. So,
Mhm.
because of this, a permanent relationship with Larry, it's a permanent relationship, but somehow when you add marriage to the mix, much as they adore her, they adore each other. He adores her, she adores him. But the whole prospect of tying that knot just frightens her. She's just scared of losing him.
Yeah. Well, and it also it adds just some little side moments of extra tension and conflict, really at a time when she doesn't need it. It's just like one more thing piled on to her in this whole relationship. So, yeah, it works really nicely actually, and because she is young, there is a lot of fear there, and it again comes across in lots of different points when she should be feeling confident and actually doesn't because of that.
Well, exactly. And plus, her daughter is on the side of, why don't you two get married already? So she's got extra. I mean, she's only 5 years old, but as you found out, she's rather a smart kid.
Rather smart. Well, and there is just something about your kid knows how to push your buttons better than anyone else on earth.
Exactly.
Anyone. Um, but then they grow into such delightful, wonderful creatures. Um, so your stories, as I mentioned earlier, do take place in different cities because during the off season, Julia gets to travel around and be a guest concertmaster, which is really awesome. So as far because there is the police procedural aspect to these novels. Do you have to start from scratch for every city that you put Julia into, or do you just kind of assume that every city is sort of similar?
Well, I found out when I first started out in New York and started interviewing any cop who would even talk to me, of which there are very few actually, um, that things are different wherever you go, even from New York to New Jersey, across the river, whatever. So I just took it as an assumption that I would have to be researching for each different city, um, as also as a part of the history of those cities and of the opera companies. But I found that absolutely fascinating because in each city, as you can imagine, there's a different approach to crime solving. And things even have different names, like a detective in New York is an inspector in San Francisco, little details like that, which make everything that much more interesting, but it also makes Julie's investigations that much more challenging because she's dealing with a whole different way of approaching things in each city. So when I first started researching San Francisco's history and the history of its police department, I kind of sensed that the gold rush would have a huge impact on the development from this tiny little town to a major city. But I never realized that back then, and we're talking about, 150 years ago or more, things were quite different in the Wild West than they
It
were.
was wild.
Yeah, I mean, very uncivilized. In fact, I just thought it was so fascinating that the police force back then during the gold rush at that time consisted mostly of former criminals who were less committed to crime solving than to keeping their more crime prone colleagues out of jail. How amazing was that? Or when it came to opera, it was the immigrants, especially the Italian ones, who convinced not only the police, but the miners, no relation, who hung out in these saloons that the miners needed opera to up their culture quotient so that they could be a serious civilized city. And all of that led to something else, led to something else. So it was like being Alice in Wonderland and down the rabbit holes all the time. And it was just fascinating. I just love the research and just to know that it's everything's different wherever you go as far as crime solving. And that's another thing that makes writing mysteries so much fun.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I loved all the gold rush, the tie of the police force to the gold rush and how that all, helped to make San Francisco a real city. Uh, Even though it didn't really want to be. It really wanted to be kind of like just this little cesspool of crime. But yeah, that worked really well. One of the things that I recently found out was that to be a coroner, um, it's different in every county and every state. So like if you die in Texas, the coroner is an elected official who just has to be 18. That's the only qualification.
Why am I not? Yeah.
So yeah, just everywhere you go, it's going to be a little bit different.
Which means limitless possibilities for writing stories.
Exactly. Which, speaking of which, where is Julia going next?
Well, after 3 books in 3 years, both Julia and Erica are going to take a bit of a break. Um, though I did have a recent discussion with my publisher about future possibilities. So it, like I said, it'll take a bit of a break. But I've also had in mind and spoken to people at Seattle Opera about possibly doing a fourth one there, which would be the logical thing to do. Whatever happens, if the series continues, of course, Rebecca is going to continue to have a major role as she grows and changes and mature, which could be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, that'd be
on
great.
yeah, I mean, as a kid, I actually based a lot of her on an actual kid that I met in Santa Fe who was 5 years old and was, a genius. I mean, she played violin, she wrote music, she sang, she wrote prose. I mean, she had the vocabulary of an 18-year-old or more. Yeah, her mother was a famous violinist. So I had a chance to spend time with her, and I have to say that a lot of Rebecca was inspired by this amazing kid. So, now that amazing kid is probably, 9 or 10 or something like that. And kids get more and more interesting as they get into that age, or who knows, as a teenager. I haven't decided what, but I think it would be an interesting next step for Julia and for Rebecca. On the other hand, maybe I'll take a break from that. And as I discussed with the publisher, write something historical because opera, after all, has a 400-year history
Yeah.
and that can be mined for all kinds of material that could be quite intriguing. So there are a lot of different ways, lot of different doors that could open one way or the other. So it's all kind of gestating in my mind right now. But yeah, I'm going to stick with Overture to Murder and make sure that this baby gets the nurturing it deserves.
All right. Well, I'm just gonna say this. Don't wait too long because I want to read the next one. But I completely understand taking a break. Because yeah, there's well,
It,
took you
yes.
like a year to write this book, and I read it in 2 days. So that is
Very
one of the issues with writing versus reading.
Well, it's like, practicing versus auditioning.
Mhm.
You practice for months and months, and then you get up in front of an audition committee and you have 10 minutes, you know, to
Or if
prove
you're singing, you have 8 bars.
or something something, not even compared to all the preparation. So
Yeah.
that's kind of given. But the main thing is that you enjoyed reading it and it kept your attention so that you got to read the whole thing in 2 days. I mean, love to hear that.
So much fun. Well, thank you so much, Erica, for being here. And thank you, all of our listeners and watchers, for being here at Blackbird Writers Presents Author Interviews.
Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to keeping up our, this contact between us as writers. We have a lot of kindred spirit going on here. So, it's been a pleasure as always.
As always. Thanks, Erica.